Hello, my lovelies, and welcome to another episode of Rain Rants. I am Rain, and today I have decided to title the episode Don't Be a Zak Bagans. So, the title is admittedly a little clickbaity. Sorry about that, but it's all in good fun. It is finally feeling like fall here in southern Louisiana. The temperature has actually dipped the last 2 days to the point that I am sitting here enjoying a nice hot cup of apple cinnamon tea with a little bit of honey. It finally feels like fall, and that feels so good to me. Tomorrow is Halloween. I'm getting ready for trick or treat. It's fun times. But this is also a time of year when people who don't normally do paranormal investigating or ghost hunting or seances or any sort of communicating with spirits give it a go to see what happens. Because it is Halloween, it is Samhain. Whether you just like Halloween, the secular holiday, or if you do celebrate the more spiritual holiday of Samhain. And that's why I called this episode Don't Be a Zak Bagans, because if you followed me for a while, you know that my friends tease me that he is my arch nemesis because he is everything that is wrong with the paranormal community. Now, I'm small fries. I don't think any of his cultists are going to find this video, but if they do, feel free to just ignore them in my comments. We don't feed the trolls. I will delete anything that gets too bad, but by the same token, I try to never delete a comment just because it is a difference of opinion. But those of us who are heavy into the paranormal community and the paranormal field know that his followers are essentially cultists and that they will leave very unhinged comments on anything that dares to call Zak out and actually call a spade and shed some light on some very obvious and provable truths about him. That said, this episode is not actually about him. Again, it was just sort of a fun, tongue-in-cheek, clickbaity title. But for anyone who doesn't know, just to cut you up to speed, Zak fakes his evidence. He's very much known. It's widely known. It's been exposed. Ghost Adventures, all of that is fake. As far as the paranormal goes, he has absolutely zero credibility. He has actually set the paranormal field back from what had already been achieved, and he has put such a blight on the study that he actually will continue to set paranormal research, legitimate academic research, back for probably decades to come. Not only is Ghost Adventures fake, but the museum he runs is also fake. It's just a tourist trap. He's exploitive of anyone that he can, other people in the paranormal community, people who are experiencing hauntings and things. News recently showed just how exploitative of women he is. He's not a good person within the paranormal community in the research sense, in the respectability sense for the paranormal community. He's also just been shown to be a objectively bad person in general. So there's the nutshell. If you want, we can dive into all that in another episode. But anyone who isn't caught up, I would just want to kind of catch you up there. And yes, as far as the stuff that is fraudulent goes, he is well aware of all of the stuff that he has that is fraudulent that he promotes as authentic. But kind of where we're touching on that actually in this episode, and why I decided to name the episode that, is because there's a lot of things that he does in his quote-unquote paranormal investigations that are not good practices. So just to keep everybody safe so that we can have fun, we can enjoy the holiday, we can try to make spirit communication a thing that is safe and productive for us for the holiday, I thought we'd go over some do's and don'ts if you're going to be doing an investigation or a ghost hunt, or you're going to try any sort of spirit communication. So let's go over some don'ts first. Don't provoke or summon ghosts, entities, spirits of any kind in your Halloween or Samhain festivities. Remember that when you are in these reportedly haunted locations, that very often, if there is a spirit there that you are going to encounter, they were more than likely a person at one point in time. They likely are an earthbound spirit that hasn't moved on. They're stuck here on our sort of plane of existence. And you should treat them with the same respect that you would treat a living human being. Yes, sometimes you do encounter things that never were human, are not human. I understand that. But more often than not, what you're going to encounter in these places, if you encounter anything, is an earthbound spirit. That spirit was once a living, breathing human being, and you should treat them with the same respect that you would treat any human being that you meet while you're out and about. Never take anything from a location that you are investigating. Now, there's a couple of different reasons for this. First of all, it's not yours, so don't touch it, don't take it. 2, if there is something that is not friendly there and you take it with you, that could be an invitation for you to take something from the site home with you, and then you've got to deal with that. So think of it in 2 ways. 1, it's disrespectful to take something that isn't yours. And 2, think of it as sort of spiritual sanitation, if you will. Keeping yourself and your space clean by not bringing anything from the quote-unquote contaminated site home with you. Now, I don't look at sites as contaminated because, again, more often than not, we're dealing with departed people that just haven't crossed over. So I do see them as human beings, and I don't see them as contamination for the most part. But sometimes earthbound spirits can become very angry, very mischievous, very toxic. And so you don't want to run the risk of bringing any of that home with you in case there is a spirit like that at the location you are investigating. So it's best practice just to leave everything there and not take anything from the site home with you. Not all, but a great many reportedly haunted sites have a lot of history to them. So don't disrespect the history of a place, and don't disrespect the followers of minority religions by vandalizing a space in any way. So don't leave a tag, don't spray paint anything, don't mark anything, don't do anything like that, even if you think it's funny. There are a lot of reportedly haunted sites that today, in 2025, people like Zak and other sensational or uneducated ghost hunters, paranormal investigators, whatever you want to call them, go to, and they'll find pentacles or pentagrams or upside down pentagrams or upside down crosses or things like that. And then they will spin this narrative that it was a black mass or Satan worshipers or witches that haunt or have cursed or have hexed the space, and that's why it's haunted and things like that. First of all, since a lot of these places are historic or have some historic value or some history to them, because generally speaking, the older the site, the more lore there is around it having paranormal activity. We don't want to disrespect that history by disrespecting the space. We want to leave it better than we found it, or at the very least in the same condition that we found it. There is an argument for not improving the space due to moving things may upset the spirits. Also, the whole don't take things from a space. So there is an argument for leaving everything alone. Sometimes it is okay to clean the space up a bit. So you'll have to look at where you are and determine which of those approaches is right for the space that you're in. But we don't ever want to vandalize or mark the space. Now, I know that some people think that it's absolutely harmless, but if you follow a minority religion and you see how we are portrayed, not only in things like horror movies, but also by paranormal investigators, you know that when people spread these myths, that there are a lot of people who can't distinguish fact from fiction. And so people who don't know better or who have a bias or a prejudice against minority religions take that as confirmation of their bias and their beliefs, and they run with that. And we are in a time where that can actually be dangerous. I have been pagan and been in pagan spaces long enough to know what the implications of that can be. I have seen pagans arrested because of their beliefs, because that got them accused of doing something they hadn't. There are still people in prison from the satanic panic that we know are 100% innocent, but yet they have not been released from prison. And I have seen families torn apart. I have seen parents lose custody of their children because of what other people think is true about followers of minority religions instead of the truth about minority religions. So this is really a big deal, and we need to be mindful of this, and we need to call it out when it happens, when we see it happening, because it is very detrimental, and the effects can go on for a very long time. Just look at the Conjuring House. All of that, thanks to Ed and Lorraine Warren, has been blamed on this supposed witch, right? Bathsheba. Here's the thing. Historians have gone and looked. There was a woman by that name. There is no evidence that she practiced any sort of witchcraft. She lived in a different town. She was just a mother. She had no connection to the actual Conjuring House itself. However, here we are in 2025, still blaming the activity of the Conjuring House on her, thanks to Ed and Lorraine Warren, who we all know were frauds and con artists. And her name is still being dragged through the mud hundreds of years after her passing. She is being blamed for horrific acts. And there's no evidence to support that. In fact, there's evidence to the contrary. And yet, because people who did not like minority religions and people that were other than them wove this tale for profit and gain and greed, and this poor woman who was a real person who lived all that time ago, is still having her name and her reputation dragged through the mud for something she had no connection to whatsoever. Next, don't enter anywhere that it is illegal for you to enter. Now, this is a do as I say, not as I did when I was young and dumb, because yes, if you've heard some of my ghost stories from my youth of things that I did and places that I explored, I did as a youngster enter into places that perhaps I was not expressly allowed to be present at. That said, I am older now and wiser. I have done the stupid shit so that you don't have to. Thankfully, I was lucky and I never got caught, but I do know folks who entered into places to track down urban legends and ghost stories that were not so lucky and did catch trespassing charges. And I know it's so tempting to go into a cemetery on Halloween. Believe me, I understand the urge. However, I will remind you that more often than not, cemeteries are not haunted in the traditional, normal sense of the word. Not that you can't encounter spirits in a cemetery, but they aren't haunted. And if you would like to learn more about the distinction and what you actually might bump into in a cemetery, I do have an episode here on the channel that is titled Spirits You're Likely to Encounter in a Cemetery. You can go check that out to learn why cemeteries aren't really haunted and what a haunting actually is and what things you might actually encounter in a cemetery. The last don't I'm going to mention is don't actually scare anyone while you are doing these activities on or around Halloween. Now, I'm all for a good harmless prank. I am not the kind of person who usually plays the prank. However, I have pretty much always had groups of friends that at least a few of them are very much into doing pranks and or being pranked. So here's the deal. If you have a friend that very much likes it when you pull their leg, play a harmless prank on them, and that's something they enjoy, and you all have that give and take, or you all have, sort of a system that works for you, that's fine. But this is not a time to mess around with someone who is not receptive to these types of pranks. it can create some bad energy, and you are in haunted spaces. If there is a certain type or types of entities present and you do this, then that can also have an impact as well. So this is more of a don't be a dick, and also sort of spiritual sanitation or protection again. If the person you want to play a prank on is receptive to that, like they like that sort of thing, then that's a different vibe, and that'll put out a different energy, and that's a different situation. But don't use this opportunity if you have a friend that's going along with you and they're very hesitant about this thing, or they're very afraid about these things. Don't use the situation and the environment to play a prank on them. One, it's just a dick move that can actually, have a serious, real negative impact on the person that you're pranking. And two, depending on what spirits are around, it could have further ripples of complications or negative impacts. Now let's talk about my best advice, the to-do list, if you will, if you're going to be going on some sort of investigation or the like for Halloween. So, and really this applies to any time of year, but because of the time of year it is, I'm focusing on that. Let things happen organically. Don't try to force anything to happen. Again, this is sort of the mirror of don't be antagonistic and try to provoke anything, but also just sort of let it unfold. Then you get what the real vibe and the real situation is in whatever haunted location you are at. If something's genuinely haunted and you just let it happen, great. If something's an urban legend, sometimes you can get a false positive by trying to force the situation. And there's all kinds of reasons for that. The Philip experiment, if you are familiar with it, is a great example of why something might happen in a non-haunted location, that you just believe in the urban legend, and by you doing things and try to elicit responses, you actually create the responses. So just let things happen organically. It's okay to ask if anybody's here, or if the location is haunted by a specific entity. Then maybe you do just say, hey, is so-and-so here? Little things like that I don't think are a huge deal. I do those myself, but you don't want to provoke or summon or call out a specific spirit or entity. Just let things flow and happen organically. Just kind of observe. Honestly, truly, honestly, most of genuine paranormal investigation is just sitting and observing the environment. The most important piece of paranormal investigation equipment is yourself. Record your vibe, your feelings, your impressions, your thoughts, anything you see. All of that should be recorded and taken into consideration for the full experience. Now, is that scientific evidence? No, but it also isn't meaningless, pointless, or trivial. It is important what you see, feel, experience in the location. Most ghost hunting equipment that people tout has either been debunked or is speculative at best. We don't know if it really works or not. So my advice is only take what you already have or what you can afford to waste money on. The idea of the spirit box or the ghost box or whatever you want to call it, they have so many names for them now. You can get them as actual devices in and of themselves. You can get apps for your phone. Largely in the actual paranormal community, those who are actually in this for the science, those have all been debunked. That is considered a hoax. They are not considered to be scientific evidence in any way, shape, or form. Now, if you want to use one just for fun because you already have one, or you want to spend, $5 to $15 on an app that will act as a spirit box just for shits and giggles, that's entirely your prerogative. I'm not going to tell you that you absolutely can't. Just understand that there's no good science to it and that it is debunked as a investigative tool. REM pods also have been widely debunked as being any sort of actual evidence of paranormal activity or presence. What equipment do I recommend? Well, your phone is a good tool because you have video and photos on there. You also have the ability to record or potentially record an EVP through a voice recording app on your phone. It's very funny to me because I saw a TikTok the other day of a girl who says that she has all these hours in paranormal investigation, and she very well may. I'm not saying she doesn't, but she was promoting spirit boxes and REM pods, and I'm like, we really know that those don't work. Like, there's a few holdouts, but by and large, we have admitted that those are not actual forms of evidence, that they're not actually picking up on anything paranormal. But then she was also shitting on tools that have not been debunked, like EMF meters. Now, you can pick these up sometimes relatively inexpensively compared to what some of them can cost. Remember that these are tools that are actually used by electricians. While we haven't proven that they actually detect paranormal activity or presences, we also haven't debunked the possibility that that is what they are picking up on in certain cases. Now, the thing with EMF detectors is you actually have to know how to use them. So perhaps why this particular investigator doesn't like them is because she has not been educated in how to properly use them. Because if there is electricity in the space that you are investigating, it is going to give you readings in certain places. You have to know how much and where you should expect to get certain readings and where you should expect to not get a reading, or should have a very low reading and then a very high reading would indicate possibly the presence of some sort of paranormal activity or spirit, etc. You need to know what an EMF detector actually does in its, mundane job to be able to then extrapolate from that and use it for paranormal research. Another way that they are good as well is that if you take an EMF detector into an environment and just baseline, you get readings that are off the charts. And yes, one of the things you need to do if you are using EMF detectors is to get a baseline if at all possible. But if you go into an environment and the baseline is just off the charts, we do know that high levels of EMF can and do have an effect on the human body, and that you will experience the sensation of being watched. You will likely become nauseous, headaches, and other things that can mimic some of the things that people report when there is a haunting in a home. So you need to really know how to properly use an EMF detector in order to have it be a valuable tool in your paranormal investigation. Another thing that this particular person said that they didn't like to use is mag lights. Now, I will say that she is younger than me, so when I have used mag lights in paranormal investigations, and I don't use them a lot or haven't used them a lot, but I have. When I have done so though, I have used old school mag lights. She says that the mag lights that she's tried, that she notices that the mag lights themselves are just sort of undependable products, and they'll flicker in that just on their own in normal use. And so she doesn't find them reliable for paranormal investigation. Since I have not used a modern mag light, I cannot speak to that. So that is something you should be mindful of if you do want to use mag lights or any other flashlights. Perhaps she was just meaning flashlights and said mag lights. I don't know. But if you want to use a mag light or any sort of flashlight like that, you're going to want to test that first and make sure that it is dependable and steady, that it does not just randomly flicker on its own. Apparently that's an issue that she has had with whatever flashlights she was using, and so that's why she doesn't use them. And I can't fault her for that. If she was using flashlights that she noticed a flaw in, then she's right to not use them in her investigations. So I'm just going to put that out there. I have used mag lights specifically in the past for paranormal investigating, but they were old school mag lights that they did not flicker, they did not waver, they didn't anything. So you could be relatively certain that if you did get them to go off and on or flicker or anything, that then there was something going on in the environment, because that is not something they would normally do. So if you want to use flashlights, I say fine, go for it. Just make sure that you have tested them out first, that they have fresh batteries, that they don't have a tendency to flicker on their own. But if you have some dependable flashlights on hand, they could be something that you take with you on your investigations. The last thing I'm going to mention, not a lot of people have anymore this day and age, but an old school compass. Now, not the math compass that we all had to use in geometry. I mean an old school magnetic compass for navigation. Again, I'm showing my age. I'm old. That, and if you followed me, you know that my father was in emergency management, did search and rescue. And so from a young age, I was reading topo maps and using old school magnetic compasses to navigate through the woods. So I used to have one on hand. I don't anymore through our moves, but I may pick one up again if I can easily find one. I have, however, used those with great success in paranormal investigations. You can purchase them for around $10 to $15. Yes, you can get pricier ones, but generally speaking, I haven't bought one recently, but back in the day, even the, inexpensive ones, $10 to $15, will do the trick. You're just going to want to make sure that when you get it home, that it faces magnetic north, it doesn't have any wobble or play, it doesn't spin on its own, that it's actually functioning as a proper compass should. That said, why do I use them in paranormal investigation? Well, this is something I never really hear talked about in current days, but this is something that we would use back in old school paranormal investigation. Sometimes when spirits are present or entities are present, not only does it have an effect on the electricity in the environment, but it has an effect on geomagnetic fields. I have been in locations that were reported to be haunted. I found evidence there to support that. And what would happen with a compass in those environments is, instead of pointing magnetic north, the compass would point in a direction other than magnetic north on occasion, but more typically the compass would just spin in these environments. Will that happen every time that there is an entity or a spirit present? No, but it can and does happen. I have actually had that happen on investigation. So that is another idea of a tool that you could take with you on your investigations. I already mentioned a phone because it can be used as a camera, but if you want, you could also take a standalone digital camera. You could even take an old school film camera if you happen to have one laying around and have access to somewhere that will develop it for you. Now, if you're going to do that, you do have to be aware of how film is processed so that you can make sure that any anomalies that do show up in the photos aren't due to anomalies or mistakes in the processing of the film when it was being developed. But sometimes I have noticed you will pick up things on digital that you won't pick up on film, and you'll pick up things on film that you won't pick up on digital. Some people like to use Polaroid cameras for paranormal investigation. Again, there is always the potential for a defect with the camera, so you do need to rule that out if you do get any sort of anomalies in your photos, but those are some other things you could take with you as well. All right, so there's a few suggestions of what not to spend your money on and what you could potentially take with you to investigate a space. Lastly, I just want to say that I do recommend that if you are capable of offering any spirits that are lingering the chance to cross over, that I highly recommend that you do that before leaving the space that you're investigating. Sorry if you heard my doggo in the background. But I do recommend that if that is something you know how to do. If you don't know how to do that, if that's not part of your practice, then don't attempt to do it. But if you do know how, if that is a part of your practice, then I highly recommend always offering that to any lingering spirits before you leave. If you do blessings of spaces, then I recommend that you do that before you leave. But again, only if this is something that's part of your practice already, then you can go ahead and do these sort of things. I do these sort of things whenever I interact with a haunted space or a space where spirits are present, because I do those things as part of my practice. And these spirits are not here as part of our entertainment in life. They're not there just as a freak show to provide us with amusement. Again, this goes back to most of, or a lot of, the spirits you will encounter in these spaces were once human beings. And because of that, I feel that if we have the ability to do these things, we should do them before we leave the space, that we have an obligation to do those things before we leave the space. It's something that doesn't get talked a lot about in the paranormal community, and there are even people who frown on it in the paranormal community because, oh my goodness, if somebody who has the skill set to help a spirit cross over does that, well, then that spirit is no longer haunting the space, and that takes away from the draw and the paranormal tourism and things like that. So especially people who profit off of these locations, sometimes, not all of them, but sometimes they do get very upset if they know that people are either helping spirits cross over or blessing and cleansing the spaces. So just be mindful of that as well. But I do think that if we have the ability to do these things, we have the obligation to do these things as well. But that is my personal opinion for what it's worth. The last thing I want to talk about is protection. I do feel that before we go into spaces that are reported to be haunted, we should do some sort of protection work prior to going in, and we should do some sort of cleansing work before going out. Now, the thing is, when you're doing spirit communication or you're investigating these sites, unless we know that there is a malevolent entity in these spaces, chances are nothing is going to bother you or harm you. Just like when you walk down the street, right? Protection is a good thing just to have or be aware of, whether it's carrying something to protect ourselves, whether it's just being aware of our surroundings and being vigilant. Protection is always a good idea, but when dealing with the paranormal, it's kind of like walking down the street. There's always a chance of harm, but how many times do you walk down the street unharmed versus how many times you walk down the street where you actually get harmed? So don't expect to be harmed, but I still think that, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And also, I do always recommend that whatever way suits your spiritual practice, that you do cleanse in some way when you go to leave the space or before you go back to your home, just as a precaution. We don't want to just presume that something's going to cling or something bad is going to happen. The chances are, that will be the exception to the rule rather than the rule, depending on what you're doing. If you go into high-risk spaces more often than not, just like if you go into high-risk places with living people, then your chance for something to happen increases, right? But if you're not specifically seeking out or having a tendency to go to places where malevolent things are more likely to be, then it's basically just like walking down the street, but you want to make sure, just for safety's sake, that you protect yourself in some way and that you cleanse yourself in some way before you return home. Better to do these things and not have needed to do them than to not do them and then have needed to do them. All right, I think that's it for this episode of Rain Rants. If you do go and investigate anywhere, or you do any sort of seance or spirit communication over this holiday or anytime, and you want to, drop us a comment below to tell us about it, I would love to hear about your experience. always happy to hear from you guys. If you have any questions or other things that you'd like to add that I maybe didn't talk about in this video, make sure to leave them down below also, because I do pay attention to them. I am still offering readings and mentorships, though I only do a handful of readings a month at this point. I've just taken a step back kind of from that, needed a little bit of a break. I may start doing them more frequently in the future. I don't know, but right now I'm just taking a few a month. You can message me through my website or you can message me through Etsy. For the holiday, I do have 2 listings up on Etsy for readings. I have past life readings, and I have my messages from death in regard to life transitions, which I love that reading. It's a great time of year for it, but it is a rather in-depth, long reading. It is really about doing the spiritual work. So they are up on Etsy right now, but if you're looking for any other sort of reading, just message me and I'll let you know what my availability is and we'll work something out. And if you're looking for a mentorship, you can message me through my website or you can message me on Etsy as well about that. I do have a video planned on servitors, which I'm hoping to get up in the next week or 2. I don't usually talk about stuff like that on the YouTube page, so I'm excited to see how this video will do and what you guys think of it. It is more of an advanced witchcraft video rather than a witchcraft 101. So I'll be interested to see what you guys think about it. If you've liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already, please subscribe so that you know when I upload videos, because as I have talked about, this channel is really just a hobby now. I don't have a set schedule. It's just whenever I have time and the mood strikes me. But until I see you again, my lovelies, blessings to you wherever your journey finds you.